Alexander Baker. I remember the night so clearly, even now, as if every moment were etched on the walls of my mind in blood and regret. My name is Alexander Baker, and I have spent years in the depths of my own darkness, a place where every decision led to ruin. It was the early summer of 1993 in New York City, when neon lights and humid streets masked the sins that weighed upon my soul. I sit in my cell on Rikers Island, the cold concrete a constant reminder of the irreversible choices I made. I have been marked by fate as a convicted murderer, and tonight I set aside pride and pretense to record my truth in hopes that these recollections might serve as both catharsis and confession. I grew up in a modest house in Brooklyn, raised by a single mother who tried her best. I was an introverted child with a penchant for daydreaming and a simmering anger about the injustices I saw around me. The city itself was a labyrinth of opportunity and despair. In my adolescent years, mentors like Mr. William Harris, a retired policeman turned community advocate, attempted to guide me away from the dangerous corners of our neighborhood. But the lure of rebellion proved too enticing to resist. I was drawn to the darker undercurrents of urban existence, where secrecy and violence often sat side by side. It all began with the first act of violence that would mark my descent. I still recall the frigid night in December 1990, when I found myself entangled in a dispute that escalated beyond my control. I was barely 19, confused, angry, and desperate to assert myself. The man I confronted, a local drug dealer named Eric Mitchell, had been harassing the people in our building. I wanted to put a stop to it, to claim some measure of justice. But in that dimly lit alley behind a rundown diner on Atlantic Avenue, my righteous anger turned into something far more sinister. "Alexander, are you sure about this?" I remember his trembling voice as I confronted him alone. I could see a glimmer of fear in his eyes even before I spoke. "I'm doing what's right, Eric," I hissed. "It's time someone put you in your place." His protests dissolved in the humid air as my resolve hardened into a decision from which there was no return. That night, in a blinding flash of violence, I ended his life with a cold precision that startled even me. The immediate aftermath of that deed felt surreal. I recalled the pressure of the revolver in my hand, the taste of adrenaline mixed with revulsion, and the undeniable rush of power coursing through me. It was as though the act itself had unlocked something within a dark reservoir of impulses that had lain dormant for far too long. I carried the weight of that moment with me, even as it propelled me deeper into a spiral of criminality and murder. In those years, I was not alone. I found others whose paths were paved with the same determination to exact their own brutal justice. One such man was Richard Turner, a hardened individual whose cold demeanor masked a turbulent past. I met Richard in an abandoned warehouse in New Jersey, a meeting arranged in the haze of whispered rumors and shared sins. Sitting in the dim light, his eyes narrowed as he looked me over, Richard said in a gravelly tone, "You're new to this game, Baker, but I see something in you, a hunger, maybe a sense of purpose that I lost years ago." His words resonated with me, and for a fleeting moment, I felt understood. Our conversation was punctuated by mutual confessions. He talked about a massacre in a back alley feud with rival gangs, and I spoke of my first kill with a raw intensity. We discovered that even within the violent confines of our existence, there was a strange sort of camaraderie among us murderers. Despite Richard's hardened exterior, I later learned of his inner turmoil, a relentless struggle between remorse and the compelling need to survive in a world that had long forsaken him. I found glimpses of his humanity whenever he recounted memories of his late wife, Emma, whose gentle spirit had been crushed by a system that saw no redemption for our kind. "There was a time I thought I could be someone different," he once confided to me over cheap whiskey in a seedy bar in Newark. "But then everything fell apart, and I realized that darkness was the only thing that made sense. It's like a magnet, always pulling you back no matter how far you run." His words haunted me for years, serving as a mirror that reflected my own inner conflicts. As the years passed, the city evolved around me. In the early 1990s, New York was experiencing an energetic rebirth, masked by the lingering remnants of its notorious past. I moved from one dark alley to another, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives and unanswered questions. I recall one sweltering afternoon in July 1992 in Lower Manhattan, when I was summoned to meet an influential contact known as Jonathan Reed. Jonathan was a man who operated in the shadows, his facade that of a respectable businessman by day while dealing in illicit armaments by night. The meeting unfolded in a nondescript hotel room overlooking the Hudson River. "Alexander," Jonathan greeted me as I stepped into the room, his voice smooth and dangerously inviting. "I've heard whispers about your work. The city is rife with bloodshed, and I need someone who can handle matters that require precision." I sat down on the battered chair opposite him, acutely aware of every creak in the floorboards. "What exactly are you asking of me?" I inquired, trying to mask the jittery anticipation that bubbled inside me. He leaned forward, his eyes glistening with an intensity that bordered on obsession. "There's a target, a man involved in organized crime. His presence disrupts our operations. I want you to take him out. And after that, we'll talk about rewards, about stepping up to a bigger stage." I nodded slowly, feeling the old thrill of entering uncharted territories of depravity. That day marked another turning point in my life, a decision that would entangle me further in a web of betrayal, greed, and inevitable downfall. In retrospect, I see that my choices were not solely driven by a desire for retribution or a misguided sense of justice. There was something eerily comforting about the simplicity of violence. In its wake, the chaos melted into a temporary silence, as if the world paused for a moment of grim clarity. I began to relish the notion that I alone had the power to rewrite destinies, to decide who lived and who died. It was an intoxicating thought, one that would prove fatal in more ways than one. I remember that fateful assignment vividly. It was a humid night in August 1992, in the sprawling maze of New York's financial district. The target was a mid-level member of a notorious syndicate, a man known as Michael Lawson. He frequented a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy, a place that smelled of garlic and old secrets. I arrived dressed in inconspicuous attire, blending in with the late-night crowd. I sat at a corner table, nursing a lukewarm coffee as I watched Lawson converse animatedly with a group of dubious associates. When the opportunity finally arose, I excused myself and stepped out into the cool night air. The sound of traffic and distant sirens offered a strange backdrop to the cold determination that pulsed within me. I followed Lawson as he left the restaurant, his laughter mingling with the murmurs of the city. It didn't take long for him to wander into a desolate street that echoed with loneliness and regret. I confronted him with a quiet, almost polite, "Good evening, Michael. I'm afraid your time has come." His eyes widened in disbelief as I drew the gun with a measured precision. The conversation ended in a flash, a muffled cry, a soft thud against the pavement, and then silence once more. The killing left me both invigorated and numb. In the days that followed, whispers of a masked executioner began circulating within the underworld. I received anonymous messages of both admiration and revulsion. My notoriety grew, and with it, an increasing sense of inevitability. I realized that my actions, though driven by a warped need for purpose, had irrevocably carved my name into the record of those condemned by society. I began to keep a meticulous diary, a record meant not for redemption, but as a chronicle of brutality amid the chaos of the city. Each entry was a meditation on life, death, and the twisted beauty of retribution. One evening, while I was spending time in a dingy bar near Times Square, I encountered another man whose life had also been marred by violent destiny. His name was David Collins, a charismatic yet tormented soul who had been convicted of a murder he insisted was committed in self-defense. Seated together in a booth away from prying eyes, David and I exchanged our version of events. "I never wanted to end a life," he said, his voice shaky and sincere, "but when I was cornered, there was no escape. I acted in desperation, not malice." His admission struck a chord within me. I replied, "Sometimes, the lines between self-defense and cold-blooded murder blur until you're no longer sure which side you stand on." Our conversation spanned hours, a blend of philosophical musings and raw confessions. It was in that moment that I began to see the profound isolation of our kind souls trapped in a perpetual cycle of violence, forever condemned to search for meaning in a world that had long forgotten how to care. The path I was treading inevitably led to betrayal and retribution on a larger scale. My association with powerful figures such as Jonathan Reed eventually attracted the attention of law enforcement. Detective Sarah Matthews, a relentless investigator known for her intuitive understanding of the criminal mind, started closing in on me. I had heard rumors of her prowess, how she could piece together clues from the faintest traces of evidence. For months, she haunted my every move, her presence like a shadow that loomed over every illicit encounter I had. One rainy night in November 1992, as I was navigating the labyrinth of seedy backstreets in Queens, I found myself cornered. The relentless pitter-patter of raindrops drowned out my racing heartbeat. Suddenly, I heard a voice, a calm yet authoritative tone slicing through the rain. "Alexander Baker, you're under arrest." I turned slowly to see Detective Matthews standing there, her eyes steely beneath the brim of her soaked hat. "You've had your fun," she continued, stepping closer. "Now it's time to pay for your crimes." I smirked, a gesture that belied the turmoil within. "Detective Matthews, is it? I have to commend you on your persistence, but sometimes, the sins of our past catch up with us in the strangest ways." Her reply was terse, "Your words mean nothing tonight, Baker." And in that instant, I knew that my time in freedom had come to an end. The trial that followed was a spectacle of media frenzy and legal theatrics. The courtroom was filled with people from every corner of the city, from grieving families demanding justice to curious onlookers drawn by the morbid allure of a man who had seemingly embraced death as a way of life. As the evidence piled up against me, a detailed diary, eyewitness testimonies from frightened associates, and even circumstantial clues from the scenes of my crimes, I felt the weight of consequences crushing me. I was no longer the elusive specter who haunted the night, I was the subject of a public and unyielding indictment. During the trial, I was asked to speak in my own defense, a moment that became both cathartic and damning. I stepped forward, my voice betraying a calm that I did not feel. "I did what I believed was necessary," I began, locking eyes with the jury. "In a world ruled by chaos and corruption, my actions were a misguided attempt to restore balance. I am not asking for forgiveness, I am simply recounting a life that has known only darkness." My words rippled through the courtroom, evoking gasps, murmurs, and even tears. Yet, despite the drama, the law was unyielding. I was found guilty of multiple counts of murder, and my fate was sealed with a sentence of life imprisonment without parole. In the years behind bars, I have become something of a reluctant philosopher, a man forced to meditate upon the nature of sin, redemption, and the inescapable pull of my own inner demons. The walls of my cell, though unyielding, have given me time to reflect on the choices that defined my existence. I remember the voices of those I once encountered: Richard Turner, whose hardened exterior had been a mask for profound sorrow; David Collins, who still believed that his actions were a desperate bid for survival; and even Detective Matthews, whose resolve and compassion in the face of darkness had left an indelible mark on me. Each of these figures, in their own way, represented the fractured reflections of a society that had lost its moral compass. It was during one particularly long winter, as I sat gazing out through the barred window at the bleak New York skyline, that I began to document my thoughts. I recalled every detail: the shimmering lights on the Hudson River, the oppressive rhythm of city life, and the countless voices that had whispered secrets in the dark. I wrote about the beauty I had once seen in the chaos and the fragile hope that sometimes blossomed even in the most desolate corners of my mind. With each word, I tried to reconcile the monster I had become with the man I might have been. I began to see hints of redemption, not as an absolution for my crimes, but as a fragile understanding of how circumstances, choices, and fate intertwine to shape our destinies. But redemption is a fickle friend, one that never grants favors easily. The memories of my crimes, a lover's final gasp, a friend's pleading eyes, the irrevocable loss of life, continued to haunt me relentlessly. I was reminded each day that no amount of introspection could ever change the past, that the only truth I could cling to was the raw, brutal reality of what I had done. Even in solitude, I heard whispers of my past, the echo of Eric Mitchell's final cry in that cold alley, Michael Lawson's fading laughter on that desolate street, and even the soft, resigned voices of those who once tried to steer me away from a doomed path. One memory, in particular, cuts to the core like a jagged shard of glass. It was a sultry summer night in 1994, and I had managed to secure temporary freedom for a friendly visit outside the prison walls, a procedural anomaly, nothing more. In a dim diner in Greenwich Village, I met with an old associate named Samuel Collins, no relation to David but a man with equally haunted eyes. We sat in a red vinyl booth near the counter, the flickering neon sign outside casting blurred reflections on the rain-soaked pavement. Samuel asked in a quiet tone, "Alex, do you ever wonder if there was another way? A path that led away from all this?" My answer was a heavy sigh. "I wonder every day, Samuel. Every night in this cell, I ask myself if there was a chance to become the person I once hoped I could be." He responded, "Maybe it's too late for that now. We're forever defined by our choices, for better or worse." His words resonated deeply, echoing the hopeless inevitability that now seemed to shroud my very existence. Over time, I observed that not all who are condemned for the darkest of crimes lose their capacity for introspection. During one of the rare moments of unexpected reprieve, I participated in a prison art therapy program. The program was intended as a means of rehabilitation, a way to let the inmates explore their inner worlds through creative expression. I resisted at first. How could I, a man so enshrouded in his own guilt, transpose years of violent memories into strokes of paint and lines of poetry? But gradually, as I hesitantly dipped a brush into thick, somber ink, I discovered that the act of creation might be the only route to understanding the demons within. In one particularly grueling session, I painted the dim silhouette of a cityscape under a stormy sky, the broken windows of old tenements, the twisted metal of abandoned factories, all bathed in a melancholic gloom. A fellow inmate, Thomas Reed, no relation to Jonathan Reed, but a man with similarly tragic scars, watched me work in silence. "You're trying to fix what you can't repair, Baker," he murmured. I paused, meeting his gaze. "Maybe," I replied, "but sometimes acknowledging the broken pieces is the first step toward making peace with the past." Thomas's eyes glimmered with a mix of understanding and sorrow. "In here, sometimes all we have are our regrets and a thread of hope. Never lose sight of that thread, no matter how faint it appears." His quiet words lingered with me long after our conversation ended. My introspection did nothing to abate the constant barrage of guilt, yet it allowed me to perceive the intricate connections between our lives and crimes. For every act of brutal violence, there was a corresponding moment of vulnerability, a chance meeting, a whispered conversation, or even a rare burst of compassion that defied the darkness around me. I began to accept that my identity was not solely defined by the tally of lives I had taken or the blood that stained my hands, but also by the fractured humanity that still flickered within me amid despair. Even as I penned these recollections, I could sense the inescapable irony. Here I was, a convicted killer, chronicling the lives of murderers in a bid to understand the human soul, a soul that had been warped beyond recognition by life's relentless cruelty. I recalled the words of Detective Matthews during my trial, "Your confession isn't a redemption, it's a testament to the inevitability of evil in this world." And perhaps she was right. My saga was not one of eventual salvation, but a perpetual struggle between the remnants of a man who once dreamed of a quiet life and the monstrous urges that had festered over years of neglect and betrayal. In quieter moments of reflection, I would often think of the city itself. New York in the 1990s was a living, breathing entity, a kaleidoscope of hope and decay intermingled. I recalled wandering the neon-lit streets of Manhattan, where the clamor of commerce and conflict merged into a symphony of urban life. I thought of Central Park in autumn, where beneath the vibrant blaze of falling leaves, people strolled obliviously, unaware of the sorrow that lurked in every shadowed corner. I wondered if any of them ever contemplated the profound duality of existence, where beauty and horror coexisted in a delicate, often fatal, balance. My story is one fragment in a larger mosaic of urban decay and redemption, but it is a story that has left an indelible mark on my soul. I have come to see that every person, no matter how steeped in darkness, is always more than the sum of their deeds. Even as I recount my own crimes, I glimpse a tortured humanity that resides in every corner of existence. I have met people, victims, survivors, and even fellow perpetrators who, in their myriad ways, have hoped for even a sliver of forgiveness, a chance at absolution that remains just out of reach. Looking back, I realize that many of the murders I committed were not premeditated expressions of malice, but rather the consequences of a life caught between chaos and the desperate longing for order. Even in the midst of brutality, there were moments of clarity, a reminder that we are all capable of love, of regret, and of redemption, however fleeting it might be. I have learned that tragedy is not merely the sum of our actions but also the interplay of fate, choice, and the harsh realities that shape our existence. When I crossed that irrevocable line on that cold December night in 1990, I did not simply become a murderer. I became a casualty of a world that was indifferent to my pain and a victim of my own inner tumult. As the years turn into decades and the icy grip of regret settles over me, I sometimes envision a different outcome, one where I might have chosen a different path, a life of quiet perseverance rather than one marked by calculated violence. But in this dingy cell, with its unyielding bars and monotonous routines, even the wildest dreams of redemption are consigned to the realm of impossibility. Each day is a reminder that once the journey of violence begins, there is no returning to innocence. There are nights when the echo of sirens and distant footsteps outside my cell conjure images of the streets I once roamed freely, of the city that pulsed with life but also harboring secrets too dark for the light of day. I recall the gruff laughter of my accomplices as we planned our next move, the hushed warnings from those who knew that once you tasted the forbidden fruit of bloodshed, the taste never truly fades. I think of the final moments of those who fell victim to my hand, brief flashes of life extinguished in an instant of terror and despair. And despite the horror inherent in these memories, I understand that they are as much a part of me as my scars and my regrets. There were moments when I attempted to connect with the world beyond these unforgiving walls. I received letters from estranged relatives, some expressing sorrow and disbelief, others bearing the weight of regret and unresolved anger. I exchanged sparse words with a young journalist named Andrew Wallace, who dared to ask, "Alexander, do you ever wish things had been different?" I stared at his earnest eyes, feeling the overwhelming burden of every decision that led me here. "Every day," I replied softly, "but the past cannot be unmade, no matter how desperately you wish it were. We are bound by the chains of our choices." Andrew's eyes, brimming with a mix of pity and curiosity, followed mine before he scribbled down the fleeting exchange. It is in these fleeting connections, these brief moments of shared humanity, that I realize the paradox of our existence. Though I am irrevocably tarnished by my actions, I remain fundamentally human, a creature capable of deep thought, profound sorrow, and even the faintest stirrings of remorse. My journey through life has been riddled with contradictions, a yearning for understanding amid unspeakable violence, the simultaneous allure and repulsion of my own nature, and a constantly shifting perception of justice versus retribution. And so, I write not as a plea for forgiveness, but as an honest, unflinching account of a man's descent into darkness, a narrative woven from the threads of violence, regret, and an unyielding quest for understanding. I have come to terms with the fact that my life is a living testament to the consequences of unbridled rage, of choices made in moments of sheer desperation, and of the relentless pull of a destiny that seems preordained from the start. Every night, as I lie awake in this suffocating silence, I replay the myriad moments that led to this point, the whispered promises, the hushed confessions, and the inexorable march of fate that culminated in my trial and sentencing. In recollection, I also remember the day I last saw Detective Matthews. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in mid-1994 when she visited the prison to offer some final words, a gesture of compassion amidst the cold bureaucracy of justice. Her eyes, full of empathy despite the necessity of duty, met mine as she said, "Alexander, I hope you find a way to make peace with your past. Sometimes, in accepting who we are, we begin to heal. For a moment, her words broke through the hardened layers I had built over the years, and I felt a stirring of something akin to grace. "Thank you, detective," I murmured, though I knew that the path ahead was as dark as the lettered records that confined me. Her departure left a bittersweet echo in my mind, a reminder that even in a life defined by sin, there exists the possibility, however faint, of redemption. Now, as I chronicle every memory, every whispered regret, I am forced to confront the undeniable truth: the choices we make shape not only our lives but the very fabric of those around us. I was not alone in my descent. In every shadowed corner of this city, in every whispered conversation in smoky backrooms, there were souls wrestling with their own demons, convicted murderers whose stories interwove with mine in a tapestry of horror and tragic inevitability. Every brutal act, every moment of weakness, formed a chapter in the annals of a life lived on the edge of oblivion. From the dim corridors of detention centers in New York to the hidden enclaves of criminals in London's underbelly, yes, even across the Atlantic, where the foggy streets of East London echoed with tales of similar transgressions, I became part of a clandestine network of those forsaken by society. I witnessed how the allure of violence transcended borders and how human vulnerability found common ground in the most unexpected places. I recollect a conversation with a British inmate, Michael Donovan, whom I met during a rare inter-prison exchange program. Over shared meals in a sterile dining hall, Michael confided, "In my country, the ghosts of our past wars never leave us. They whisper in the streets, in every nail-biting decision, in every gunshot. Here, your own misdeeds haunt you as faithfully as any specter." His words, gentle yet haunting, underscored that the burden of violence is universal, a truth I had come to accept painfully. There were days when I dreamed not of escape, but of understanding the simple, elusive yearning to untangle the intricate web of my existence. I tried to reason with myself, clinging to the hope that perhaps these recollections could serve as a means to draw some semblance of meaning from the wreckage of my life. It was in such moments that the memory of my mother would surface, her soft voice urging me to seek solace in kindness rather than cruelty. I remember her saying, "Alex, in every heart, no matter how burdened by pain, there is a flicker of light. Do not let that light die." Her words, once a beacon of warmth, now felt like distant echoes, futile in the face of the monstrous legacy I had built with my own hands. Every conversation in these endless nights within these walls, every crumpled letter from outside, deepened my internal struggle. I began questioning not only my past but the nature of evil itself. Was I truly a monster, or was I merely a product of circumstances of a society that had forsaken me long before I ever truly chose violence? I remember one heated discussion with a fellow inmate named Benjamin Moore. Benjamin, a man of sharp intellect and a once promising career in academia, had turned to a life of crime after a series of personal tragedies. During one sleepless night, he challenged me, "Do you believe that evil is innate, or is it something that we learn? I always thought that our environment molds us. You, Alexander, are nothing but a reflection of the broken world that raised you." I glared at him, feeling equal parts rage and sorrow. "Perhaps," I admitted slowly, "but when you stand at the precipice of your own destruction, you realize that choices aren't always a luxury, but a cruel inevitability." Benjamin fell silent, and for a long while, we sat in the oppressive darkness contemplating the nature of human existence. In recounting these events from my perspective, I am reminded that our identities are inextricably linked with the consequences of our actions. I have taken lives without mercy, yet I have also felt the burden of remorse with every sunrise behind these bleak walls. I understand now that the journey through cruelty, regret, and fleeting moments of clarity is as unpredictable as the city streets I once roamed. As I bring these recollections to a close, I must acknowledge that what you have read is a mere fragment, a dark reflection of a life steeped in violence, choices, and an ever-present longing for absolution. My narrative is not meant to glorify the acts of murder, but to shed light on the tangled web of circumstances that can drive a person to commit unspeakable acts. I stand not as a symbol of redemption, but as a stark reminder of the consequences when humanity loses its way. This is a fictional tale and not based on actual events. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to my channel, like, and check the description to find out how you can support my work.